Okay, I've been working on this video for a while, and honestly, I wanted to make this video because I really thought this show was going to get canceled in one season. So I thought if I just got all my thoughts together about the first season, that would cover the whole show. But boy, was I surprised when it actually got a second season. But that hasn't come out yet. We'll worry about that later. Anyway, today I'm talking about Digman. Baby down, down. No, wait, that's Gridman. I'll talk about Gridman later. Anyway, Digman. Digman is the latest flash in a pan adult comedy show to follow South Park on Comedy Central. South Park has been on the air for over 30 years now, and in that entire 30 years' time, Comedy Central has struggled and failed and tried over and over again to put another animated show after it to soak up its success. I think the only one that almost did it was Drawn Together like 15 years ago. That show strangely has its own weird legacy nowadays. But yeah, shows keep coming and going in this time slot, and they're all just trying to like soak up some of that good South Park energy. Digman is the latest show to soak up that energy, and it replaces the abominable monstrosity that was a show called Fairview, a show I never watched, but it was universally hated for its disgusting art style of archer heads on baby bobble bodies with no defining plots or characters. Now, that being said, Digman is in its own way another unique abominable monstrosity, a combination of two basic horrible ideas. Now, I'd prefer to explain this from the bottom up, but doing that would be too obvious, so for a few seconds, look at this, and I mean, it takes 2 seconds for you to realize that it's just a painful Rick and Morty parody. But I know it's a Rick and Morty parody, I'll talk about that later, because that's not the most obvious part. The most painfully obvious part of Digman is that Digman is the latest in the time-honored tradition of SNL sketches that somehow mutated into their own bad movie or TV series. And like 90% of those products, it's dog shit. Digman is a massive extension of an SNL sketch I never saw, or I don't remember, that contained Andy Samberg. He's like the guy behind the show. Anyway, apparently he did a one-off impression of Nicolas Cage that people thought was okay. That's literally all he pitched the show on, was like, I can sound like Nicolas Cage. And honestly, I don't think the impression is that great. I think Samberg thinks it's impressive because it sounds nothing like his normal voice, which sure, that's impressive. But even though it sounds nothing like he normally sounds, it sounds nothing like Nicolas Cage either. It's like close enough to Nicolas Cage to like maybe trick a casual audience member being like, oh wow, is that Nick Cage? But yeah, it doesn't sound like Nick Cage anyway. Where extending most SNL sketches from 5 minutes into an hour-and-a-half movie is usually a bad idea, Digman unfortunately extends Samberg's weak Nicolas Cage impersonation into 8 half-hour episodes. So what is that, like 4 hours? Anyway, yeah, and on top of that, it's a Rick and Morty clone. So yeah, there's been a real shitstorm of shows in recent years trying to rip off that good Rick and Morty energy ever since Rick and Morty became the biggest cash cow of the 2010s. And unfortunately, all these shows keep coming through here trying to rip off Rick and Morty, but a lot of them don't put enough work into it to actually pull it off. Like, okay, Solar Opposites, that one kind of saved itself with the fairly interesting wall subplot. And Star Trek Lower Decks managed to surprisingly stand itself out by being the most family-friendly Rick and Morty clone ever. And it's also surprisingly more respectful to Star Trek than some other Star Trek shows I don't feel like talking about ever. But while those two shows also succeeded because they were literally made by the same people who made Rick and Morty, this one is more of a deconstruction of the very idea of Rick and Morty. Because if you're not familiar with where Rick and Morty came from a famous disgusting Flash animation where Justin Roiland just got like high and made fun of Doc and Marty from Back to the Future and implied that the two of them were a flirtatious gay couple. Somehow this idea was refined and re-rolled 100 times over until it eventually became Rick and Morty. But the thing about why that worked and why that became Rick and Morty does not apply to Andy Samberg's Nick Cage impersonation and trying to turn that into Digman. Because Digman thought that those were all the steps you need for a successful cartoon. Rick and Morty did it, Justin Roiland did it. You just do a dirty parody of Doc and Marty, and you know, Samberg could do that, right? I mean, he's got this dirty Nicolas Cage impression. He's going to say Titty and Caca in the voice of Nicolas Cage. People will be impressed. But no, so here's the thing. They looked over all the Nicolas Cage movies on IMDb, and they decided the one that they could most easily make a Rick and Morty clone out of, with Sandberg's impression, was National Treasure. Yeah, National Treasure. Yeah, sure. I mean, they could have done Raising Arizona. I think that would have been better. Or The Wicker Man. That's a comedy goldmine. And Con Air was right there. Con Air would make an excellent Rick and Morty clone. Just a bunch of cons on a plane doing like lewd shit. But no, they decided to base Digman on National Treasure instead of Con Air. And I quite frankly think going that route is Digman's original sin. See, National Treasure was the shitty minor league Disney movie from 2004 that was essentially just a Disney product to teach children history and social studies lessons while Nicolas Cage shot a gun and did a few basic ass car chases. The movie also had a straight-to-video sequel in 2007, which I'm literally just now finding out for this video. And on top of that, recently, Disney Plus revived the concept yet again as a TV show, but Nicolas Cage refused to do it, so they replaced him with a spunky teenage girl. Because once again, I don't give a shit, but that's what Disney does. They make Disney Plus shows where everything you liked is now being done by a spunky teenage girl. But the thing about it is, you can't really make a Rick and Morty clone based around National Treasure, because that's a rotten recipe. Here's the thing. Subconsciously baked into the DNA of Rick and Morty, underneath all the crap, underneath all the weird Justin Roiland dick jokes, underneath all the bizarre characters, the pure beating heart of Rick and Morty is the Back to the Future trilogy. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. I don't think a lot of people get that, or at least not consciously. But the Back to the Future movies, those movies are fucking loved. Back to the Future was for people in the 80s, what Star Wars was for people in the 70s. But you know what the difference is between Back to the Future and Star Wars? 23 years, that's the difference. The last Back to the Future movie was Back to the Future 3, and it came out 23 years ago. It was a short-lived cartoon after that, but no one saw that. Otherwise, the legend of Back to the Future has been kept alive on a barely solid IV drip of a ride that no longer exists at Universal Studios. It was closed down, and every once in a while, Christopher Lloyd will come back out in his Doc Brown outfit whenever he needs to pay his mortgage. But that's Back to the Future. You know what the last time Star Wars came out? Like fucking Tuesday on Disney Plus, because Star Wars has become a whore that sold out all of its integrity. My point is, there was zero demand for an unofficial Andy Samberg impersonation parody of National Treasure where he pretends to be Nick Cage. That just doesn't work. Rick and Morty works because there was 23 years of subconscious desire and acceptance that a dirty parody of Back to the Future would be awesome. This is Digman's original sin, that it doesn't understand this. Anyway, this just doomed the show from the start. Now I'm actually going to talk about the show. So I'll give this show one compliment. There's only one good thing about the show, and that's the character of Saltine. Saltine is an awkward, poppy, peppy, nerdy girl, and I'll be honest, the relationship she has with Digman borderline reminds me enough of the anime Zetsubo Sensei, about a suicidal teacher and the girl who loves him following around, stopping him from killing himself. But unlike Zetsubo Sensei, Digman is not funny. Zetsubo Sensei is fucking hilarious. I'm in despair. Everyone should watch Zetsubo Sensei. No one should watch Digman. Anyway, unfortunately, unlike the pure hard girl from Zetsubo Sensei, Saltine occasionally dips into these really disgusting middle-aged woman jokes that are just really cringe. It's like suddenly they just turned off the show and the actor is just like talking out loud about how she has to like go to the bathroom and like how big her poop was, like some cringe crap like that. On top of that, Saltine's kind of ugly too, but I mean, despite these flaws, Saltine is horribly the only likable and endearing character on the show. All the other characters are just fucking assholes who you want to shoot in the face with a gun. Like, Digman himself is a completely shameful, fat, shitty version of Nicolas Cage with like a fanny pack. He honestly just doesn't work as a main character of the show because he's legitimately too awful. Like, they're trying to copy the Rick and Morty thing where like Rick is like questionably terrible but also kind of cool. But Digman's not cool at all, he's just terrible. Like, Digman and Saltine's dynamic is a pure ripoff of Rick and Morty's dynamic where one of them's happy and young and one of them's old and salty, but In Rick and Morty, Rick will occasionally do like these badass cool things, and Digman is just pure self-loathing and failure with inappropriate violence and gross rapey energy. Digman is pretty much just like if they tried to make a Futurama spin-off all about Zap Brannigan, where he's just like trying to get laid every episode. But then like the entire show is just like him being drunk and on a rant about how shitty he is, because it's like trying to like capture some of that self-hating BoJack Horseman energy. Digman also has this like arch enemy, but the arch enemy has like zero personality, and I don't feel like talking about him. He's like basically just Team Rocket, but without the fun gayness. Like the dude is just by all accounts this random criminal museum guy, and the fact that Digman runs into him like in every episode is just terrible and kind of boring and predictable. Also, he has like some supporting cast. There's like a random old lesbian secretary, and that's the joke that old lesbians are gross. They expand on it in like one other episode and like dedicate themselves to like making as many jokes as possible about lesbians. But yeah, otherwise like the show is so bad. At this point, I've watched the entire first season of Digman, so let me just kind of go over what I remember from each episode. The pilot does a really bad job setting up the premise of the show, introducing all the characters, explaining Digman's wife died and was frozen in a block of ice. And then after that, he became a washed-up college professor just to hang out with Saltine, and after he meets her, the two of them immediately start going on adventures. Episode 2, they go to Italy. Saltine is way too crude in this one and is way too open about talking about her sex life in this one, which kind of like borderline ruins her as the only character on the show that you can respect, because they just like took that from her. There's also this really gross, disgusting, sad joke where they step on a bunch of pigeons who are too dumb to fly away from them, because the show, I've realized, kind of falls back on like random unwarranted violence whenever they like can't land a joke. It's like what they think is like the funniest jokes, just like hurting people. Episode 3 is like a bad James Bond parody where they fought a robot AI trying to be God. There's a couple almost funny jokes in this episode because the God computer like is very, very strictly religious in like a Deep South kind of way. Episode 4 is where Saltine makes friends with a lesbian because lesbians! Haha! But then Digman forbids them from being friends because the lesbian works for a bad guy, so they just become one-night stand secret lesbian friends. Oh, and I think there was also a supervillain gang of children in this episode, or maybe I'm confused and it was in the last episode. They kind of came and went, but that was almost a funny joke because they were like really, really pathetic villains, and also they made a bunch of video game references like, woo, video game references! Remember Pitfall? There's also another horrible, ultra-violent joke where Digman kills a baby on purpose, and it's just not funny at all because Digman murdered a fucking baby. Like, all the fucking humor in the show is just Digman randomly, like, murdering or harming babies and animals. It's like, this whole show is, like, made by psychopaths. Anyway, episode 5, they find Amelia Earhart, who's another cyborg lesbian, but she's also an old cyborg lesbian. Lesbians, am I right, guys? Anyway, they find out she's been hiding out in somehow the world from the game BioShock Infinity because the writers of the show got high and played PS3 games. Anyway, then she gives him her plane or something because that was the treasure they were looking for. There's a lot of backstory on Digman's lesbian secretary that kind of doesn't make sense or isn't really relevant. Anyway, she's thinking about leaving the show to date Amelia Earhart, but then she doesn't because she's in the other episodes. Episode 6 is about a missing Shakespeare poem that makes anyone who hears it shit their pants or have an orgasm or something. This one was just entirely disgusting. Episode 7 was about them visiting an elf village in the clouds, and the people writing the show, again, keep going with the BioShock Infinite Cloud Village angle. Like, they really can't go 2 episodes without finding a second mysterious cloud village. Okay, sure. Anyway, there's an almost funny joke that the elf princess is like way too into marrying Digman, and every horrible thing he does to turn her off actually turns her on. That was actually played to the point where it became ridiculous and actually funny. So this is probably the best joke in the show because they actually play it out like a comedy sketch. It goes on long enough to get funny, and they kept it from not being annoying because they kept raising the stakes of what was going on. The show really is trying to be a parody of the job of archaeologists, but it's clear that the show has literally never bothered to talk to any of them about what an archaeologist does, so it just falls back on bad movie parodies and weird Rick and Morty, Justin Roiland shit. It's honestly kind of sad because the show has this tragic potential. I feel like the show could have maybe not failed if the jokes were just better. Also, they are way too reliant on this boring one-note villain who really doesn't interest anything in the show, and he's in every episode and he doesn't make any of them good. The show also probably could have been better if Saltine was slightly cuter and not so much gross. All the characters on the show keep doing this thing where they subvert expectations, but in the end, Digman's just a horrible drunk asshole and Saltine's just kinda okay. Anyway, in a bizarre twist, the last episode, episode 8, manages to actually be an alright episode. It's probably a 5, whereas all the other ones were a 2. So it actually tries to decently connect the dots from all the random idiotic things that happened in the first season to a semi-interesting high-stakes finale where Digman has one last day to bring his wife back to life. And we actually get some more information about the bad guys, why they're bad, and Saltine switches sides at the last minute for really no good reason, just to create additional drama. But the episode actually uses the drama to explore whether or not Digman actually likes her as a person, and then she switches back sides at the end, but she does it in such a messy way that even though she's back with the good guys, she might still be being paid by the bad guys. I don't know, the show doesn't explain it. So I thought there was only one metrosexual black villain on the show with a weird hairstyle, but turns out there were actually 2 of them because I guess I wasn't paying attention, but I guess now that I realize there's 2 villains on the show, that they're kind of annoying and they vaguely remind me of Milli Vanilli. Anyway, the elf princess character from episode 7 also comes back in this episode, seemingly only to get worse and double down on all her crude traits. The character is kind of funny on this show. It's she's one of those blatant lol so random characters from Rick and Morty, like Mr. Poopy Butthole, but again, the last episode is seemingly impressing me with the sudden reverence towards continuity. Anyway, there's a worthless final battle, and then the bad guys seemingly are nice all of a sudden, and in a straightforward undercut, they just give Rip the Holy Grail to bring his dead wife back from the dead, but turns out it's actually a trap because the Holy Grail is actually the unholy Grail, so Rip does the first good thing in the series and decides not to bring his dead wife back to life, but then his repairman does it for him, and then his wife comes back to life as the Antichrist. And there's also the Uncle Christ too, which is just really? That's the joke you're going for? Anyway, this all immediately wraps up into a fourth wall break to set up the second season where Digman apparently now will have to kill his evil, superpowered demon wife. And yeah, supposedly the bad guys will be trying to capture her for financial gain. And yeah, I wrote this whole video thinking that Digman was going to be canceled after the season 1 finale, but much to my surprise, instead of being a one-and-done failure like literally every show that's occupied the post-South Park time slot in the past 10 years, I failed to realize that Digman was being bankrolled by a celebrity, so like the cringe Velma show of last year, it was guaranteed a second season on the basis that the celebrity paid for it. So yeah, the second season was literally announced seconds after the finale aired, making it a non-discussion done deal that they were sitting on all along. Alright, so overall, Digman Season 1 was pretty much dog shit, but the last episode had a little bit more effort put into it because they seemed to really want to ensure that second season that they turned out we're going to definitely get all along. Despite all that though, Digman Season 1 is going to have to get a 3 out of 10 for me. Pros, I would say it's an interesting twist on the Rick and Morty clone formula that they chose a random movie and impression instead of just straight up copying Rick and Morty. And pros, Saltine is almost a likable character. Cons, the show is so stupid and all the jokes are literally just Digman doing something really violent and cruel, or oh my god, lesbians can be ugly and old. Did you know that? Haha, lesbians exist. Thankfully, the writer's strike has come down hard, and if things are cool, maybe they can put a little bit more effort into the show and put it into a slightly better shape when it comes back, I guess next year or whenever. I don't know. Like, I kind of wish this show would be good because I feel like Andy Samberg, he doesn't always suck. And Saltine was okay, so I don't know. Like, I'm hoping there's eventually a good version of the show, and I'm hoping they get season 2 right, but I'm not counting on it either. Yeah, alright. Digman exists. Good night.